Table saw, heart of the shop, very, very awesome, powerful tool that accomplishes so much for us, but also can be a very dangerous tool. Over 30,000 injuries every year, 10 to 15% of which are amputations, right? That's 3,000 to 4,500 amputations per year, tons of lacerations, kickback, blunt force trauma. There's some things you don't want to do around this machine that can happen because of lack of knowledge or complacency. The most dangerous time in a table saw isn't when you're doing that risky cut, because you're normally 100% in the zone. It's when you've got a stack of 100 of things and you're running them all through and you kind of get in the zone and you forget about what you're doing. That's when things often go wrong. But I can't fix that, but I can fix the knowledge problem. So let's go over some common table saw mistakes. I'm Caleb with You Can Make This Too. Few beginning points. So obviously, lacerations and amputations happen because of blade contact. Your body touches the blade. It keeps spinning because it can't tell the difference unless you have a saw stop. Or blunt force trauma from kickback. That is when a piece of wood touches the blade the wrong way and gets thrown backwards into your body. It's kickback no matter what it hits. It's blunt force trauma when it hits your body. Hopefully it's not penetrating trauma, like if you have a sharp piece of wood and it impales you. That would suck even more. Don't want that to happen. So let's talk about how that happens. One common way, the blade on a table saw rotates toward me and down, which is nice because this cutting action is actually applying hold down force because it's cutting down, pushing the wood against the table. But on the back of the blade, we have a lifting action. That's why I have this riving knife back here. What this riving knife does is stop the wood from contacting the back of the blade, because when it contacts the back of the blade, if it could, it would lift and get to the top. And the top is moving towards me. So if it lifts and hits the top, it's going to eject at a rapid speed, not caring what or who is in front of it. A lot of what we're going to talk about today will be about preventing just that kickback. And kickback can often lead to blade contact. A lot of times lacerations and amputations actually begin with kickback. Something gets thrown, you get thrown with it, and into the blade you go. Well, one of the biggest things that can prevent kickback is having a riving knife. My old table saw, before I bought this one last year, predated riving knives. So because manufacturers didn't have to put them in, they didn't, and I didn't have the option of one. There are aftermarket considerations in products. I'll link a few below. So if your table saw doesn't have one, there are some things you can do. I'll link those below. But without a riving knife, it's really easy to contact the back of the blade. One of the reasons that can happen is because your fence is not parallel to your blade. So if this is my blade and this is my fence, and my fence is cocked towards my blade, then as I'm pushing pieces through, they're actually getting pushed into the back of the blade. That's bad. That can prevent a kickback, which goes to one of my first mistakes with your table saw and not getting good results from it, is not having it set up properly. So you want to make sure your blade is parallel with the miter slot gauge. So anything you run through your miter slots actually go parallel to the blade. Obviously, that's what you want. And then your fence also needs to be parallel to the blade. But personally, I prefer to have the back of the fence actually about 0.03 of an inch farther back from the blade than the front of the blade. Reason for that is if it's perfectly parallel, there's not much fudge, and 0.03 of an inch in woodworking is well within acceptable tolerances, but that gives me literally about half of a human hair away just of breathing room to make sure there's no pushing action against the back of the blade as that board goes through there, especially because wood has moisture and it's an organic material and it can move, so that just gives it some breathing room. So make sure your saw is set up properly. Great way to minimize kickback and just get better results. Another common mistake, having your blade way too high. What I prefer is whatever the thickness of the material is, I want the bottom of the gullets, the space between the teeth, to be right above the board. Just about that. That's all you need to effectively and safely cut. Because the more blade just hanging out of the top of the blade ain't helping you at all. It's just a hazard. Also, use a blade guard. Have your blade guard in place in as much as you can so it's not in the way. That's why I like the floating arm for what I do. That's very, very, very seldom in the way. Seldom have to move it. I know the ones that clamp on, they're like always in the way. It sucks. Next mistake. It's obvious, but people have done it. I've done it. Before you start your saw, make sure you're not in contact with the blade. One, if you have an underpowered saw, you might stall the motor. Not that that hurts anything, that's actually ideal, because if you are in contact with the blade and you start it, that's where bad things can happen, because it can kick it or throw it pretty easy if you're not ready. So always make sure that you got everything set up how you wanted, then start your saw, then feed the material through. Another common mistake is using the fence the wrong way. Fence is for making parallel cuts, so this would be ideal. What I mean by the wrong way is using it in such a way where you're creating a high hazard for kickback. Now, my rule is, well, what side of a board can go against the fence? My general rule of thumb is the long side. So if you have a square, you can do any side. This is a rectangle, so I would only put this side against the fence, because if I try to do the short side, if what I'm cutting is longer than it is deep, if that makes sense, I'm creating a kickback hazard, especially if, you know, I'm just doing a little bit, like I'm way out here. Now I have a whole lot of material. I've got to worry about twisting just the whole geometry, physics of the system. There's a high chance that this is going to shift a little bit, that I won't be able to push perfectly evenly. And when this does cant a little bit, it's probably going to catch the back of the blade and get kickback, especially if I'm way out here or super close way out here, because now, you know, I'm doing this, which also feeds into how you feed material. And if you're not really good at feeding material, you also have a much higher likelihood of cutting like that being an issue. Now with a board like this, that is a good 12 inches, I could get away with breaking that rule. But as I go to something like, say, like this is obviously way more of a, you know, that's not good, Mr. Jones kind of situation, where I need to go to the miter saw, use a cross-cut sled, or, you know, I've got the sliding table attachment, does the same thing as a cross-cut sled, because again, now I'm referencing off the long edge. The safest way to make any cut is always making sure that it's your long edge that's referencing whatever your reference surface is. All right, so I'm going to cut this or demonstrate cutting it the wrong way to talk about how to hold material and feed it through. Now, if I say always or never, just in your head put a almost in front of always and never. So almost always, almost never. There's exceptions, and you might get away with some things sometimes. But anyway, wrong way. I never push from both sides of the blade. I always, almost, have both hands on one side or the other side, depending. One exception where I might be feeding both is if I have really large sheet goods that are pretty balanced. Like if I had something on here, it was a 4x6 piece of plywood that I was cutting down in, you know, to 2 3x4 pieces. I have lots of contact and surface area and a lot of material to move, so I might have to push. But what I'd normally do is be over here with both hands, and normally wherever I have more room is where I'm going to be. Between the fence and the blade is often a danger zone, so especially if I'm small, I don't want my hands here where it's close to the blade, and I have more material over here, so that's where I'm going to hold. Where exceptions come in is if I have to get between the blade and the fence. That's where your push sticks come in. Right now I can use a push stick. That said, again, obviously I wouldn't on a piece like this, but say this was a square, if this is really big, you know, I'm not going to be trying to manage this with 2 push sticks. I've got plenty of room here to be safe. I would use both hands to feed this through. Again, something like this would probably be a larger piece. You know, it's more stable and I can feed through. With that, what's most important whenever you're cutting with the fence is maintaining contact with the fence, because the real hazard with putting your hands on both sides, and it can happen even if your hands are on the same side, is if they're not pushing equally. Let's say I push this one a little bit faster than my other one. See, it's kicking. Now I have a riving knife, which helps me, but otherwise that means if I'm far enough in the cut, the back of this material is going to hit the top of the blade or the back of the blade, and that's going to bind it and shoot it into me. That's really bad. So on that point, it's also why I never stand in front of the blade. I've I have a really big piece, I might be in front of my piece between the fence and the blade. But otherwise, in as much as I ever can, I want to be on this side of the blade, out of kind of the danger zone. Between the fence and the blade is always the danger zone. But what I'm also doing is not just pushing forward. Normally, my right hand, whatever's closest to the fence, is pushing forward, and this hand, even if it's on the back side, is actually pushing against the fence to guide my material. Now, obviously, once I'm over the blade, that doesn't work because I don't want to be pushing the stock into the blade. But at that point, you're almost finished with the cut, and I'll be transitioning to push sticks to just finish. And that's why when I'm using 2 push sticks and cutting, like, say, thin material, you often see in my videos, I'll have a setup like this going on, where I've got one kind of close to the fence pushing forward, and my other one back here on this corner applying more lateral force against. And that's why this is all chewed up, is because, yep, I run it into the blade. That's what it's there for. But this gives, it protects my fingers because this is going into the blade, but also it keeps everything against the fence, so that way I'm safe. So yeah, just think about that. And also with that is, I think another mistake is where you're watching. Don't get cut fixated. The blade is sharp, it spins fast, it's gonna be cutting. We know what's happening here. The things I wanna watch is that all my contact is staying on the fence. So whenever I'm cutting a piece, let's say it is pretty wide, so I am in the danger zone, but it's wide. This is where I have the most control over the piece. So that's where I'm gonna be, wherever I can have the most control. Hopefully that's out of the danger zone. But if I'm here, I'm watching primarily this edge to make sure that I'm feeding evenly. This hand going forward, this hand applying some sideways pressure to keep it there, because I know that's gonna cut. Nothing I see there is really gonna change anything I do, but if I see a gap opening anywhere over here, that's a sign of something bad about to happen, and I can correct that. So it's kind of like driving. I'm always watching the road, but it's also important I check my mirrors and gauges. So I'm staring at the road almost all the time, and then I do my mirror and gauges check, and I'm back on the road. Same thing, I'm always watching here, but then I'll check my blade, I check my hands. Watching here, check my blade, check my hands. Same thing. Now, what might I see at the blade? Now, my kerf, as my wood's coming through here, if I see the wood spreading or pinching, that's a sign something bad might happen. So I might want to stop the cut, turn off the saw, remove the material, lower the blade, and do multiple passes. That's a way, if your wood has a lot of tension and it's starting to pinch your blade, you just cut through in multiple passes and you get around that. But otherwise, I'm concerned with what's happening here, not what's happening here. Never freehand on the table saw. What I mean by that is we have a lot of reference surfaces, and we can make jigs to be reference surfaces. So if I've got to rip this board, I'm going to use the fence. If it doesn't have a straight edge to stay straight on the fence, I'm going to fix that and put a straight edge on this with a circular saw, a track saw, a jigsaw, the bandsaw, the jointer, a router. There's so many ways. I'm not going to freehand it. I'm going to make a jig so I can make a straight edge on here using a tapering jig. Right? What I mean by freehand is just trying to hold and wobble this. You're just asking for kickback. Now if you're like using, you know, the old contractor saw that's got a 3/4 horsepower motor that, you know, like has an inch of wiggle in the teeth, and you're feeding full size 4x8 sheets of plywood through it on the job site, that saw probably don't have the juice to throw that piece of plywood, and you're probably going to bind it up half the way, as I know, because I've done that. It's not advisable. But when you're in a cabinet shop with cabinet grade equipment that's got 2, 3, 5, 7.5 horsepower motors inside of it and heavy blades, they can throw that wood. And when you try to freehand things, you're at very high risk for that. Just don't do it. Use the reference surfaces. Be safe. Don't subject yourself to survivor bias, which is, well, I've done it before and it worked, and I've talked to a lot of the people who did it and it worked, because that just means you don't know the people who it didn't work for, and there are tens of thousands of them who've lost parts of table saws. Because remember, to not have anything bad happen when you do something stupid, you've got to get lucky every single time, but you only have to be unlucky once for it to change your life in a really bad way. I'm done talking about the blade for this video. Let's check out what I'm doing. Putting the blade down. Whenever you're done for the day, put the blade down under the table so it's safe. Then you never have to worry about bumping into it or scratching stuff if you use this as a table as well. When you're done, actually really whenever I'm done with a cut, it goes down. This saw, not so much, because I do have a floating blade guard, so there's always a blade guard sitting over this. But anytime the blade guard's out of the way, since I'm finished with those cuts, unless I know I'm coming right back and repeating that setup, that blade goes down. Another really common beginner mistake. I'm going to use my sliding attachment like a miter gauge. Imagine you're just using a miter gauge or whatever, goes this way. Again, so let's say you've got to make a lot of repeated cuts. I'm fortunate and have these 2 adjustable stops. If you don't have that, or just bending dimensions, it might be tempting to use your fence as a positive stop. Lock that in place. This is the size everything needs to be. I can make a cut, remove that piece, slide my piece down, make more over and over. You get the idea. I've seen kickback happen from this a lot of ways, and here's why. And this goes back to the setup, if your fence is perfectly parallel, or even if it tips in a tiny bit, what's going to happen is as you're feeding this across, you're creating a pinch hazard, and the fence can push this piece back against the blade, or if this isn't totally parallel, it's just, there's too many chances for even the tiniest bit of error that creates a tipping hazard where this isn't going through easy and it gets cocked and kicked back. So your fence is not a stop for a miter gauge. A trick around that, instead of my fence, I used to have a magnetic base for a dial indicator gauge from Harbor Freight. It was like 10 or 15 bucks, and I had an on-off magnet kind of deal. So I'd set that down and use that as my stop. Now what I normally do is just use a piece of wood in my fence. This is actually my stop, and I make sure that something like this is actually my stop shorter so it doesn't fall back here before the blade. So what I can do, slide my piece over to that, and then cut forward, and by the time I engage the blade, I'm clear of whatever my stop was, so my piece has breathing room between it and the fence. You don't need a ton of room between your stock and the fence, so you can just put a little block or something there. That works. Just don't use your fence as your stop. Eventually, it's going to catch up to you. Last mistake, tip I'm talking about is using the wrong blade for the wrong cut, the right blade for the wrong cut. I don't know. So if you have a combination blade, it's pretty good for anything. If you want optimal results, use dedicated blades. Saw I had before this one, I had 3 blades that I rotate through. I had a fine crosscut, a plywood melamine blade, and a ripping blade, and I just switch out the blade depending on what I was doing because it only took maybe 20 seconds and I got much better performance. With the soft stop, I have to adjust several more things. It takes a little bit longer to change. So I just went to a combination blade, and I use a Kling's Spore combination blade now, which I get results I'm very happy with. But if you want to get the best results, make sure you're using the best blade. And if you're using a dedicated blade and you're not using it for that purpose, like say I'm trying to cross cut with a ripping blade, I'm going to get a lot of tear out and it's not going to be very good. Say I'm trying to rip through 8/4 hardwood with a blade meant for plywood that has like really steep angles and aggressive cuts and a lot of teeth, I'm going to bog down that saw and probably burn that wood and test my blade. So just bear in mind you're using the right blade. And with that, when your blades get dirty, clean them. And when they get dull, change it. I think that's another common problem with just most tools is not changing your blades when it's due. It'll save you so much time and hassle and potentially save your equipment versus, straining your motors and bearings and everything, trying to shove stuff through a blade that's way past its good cutting life. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something, found it entertaining. I forgot my outro. What do I say? Oh yeah, hope you learned something, were inspired, or at least entertained. Until next time, make time to make something.